Good evening and thank you for coming. My name is Alessandra Moctezuma and I'm the curator, gallery director here at Mesa College. And I'm very pleased to introduce Chicana artist Judith Baca. And Judith is an acclaimed painter and muralist. She actually started the citywide mural project in Los Angeles in 1974. And with that, she enrolled many young people to paint murals and learn about their history all over the city of Los Angeles. She later co-founded the Social and Public Art Resource Center, SPARC, which is in Venice, and through SPARC painted the Great Wall of Los Angeles, the longest mural in the world, a half-mile long. Judy is also an educator. She teaches at UCLA, where she started the Cesar Chavez Digital Lab, and she's an activist. And I had the privilege of working with Judy for 5 years. I started out as her painting assistant, and later moved to help at SPARC. And with her, I learned a lot of things that they didn't teach us at the university. At UCLA, I learned about art history, I learned about painting, I learned about technique. But working at SPARC and working with Judy, I really learned about community. I myself am from Mexico and I had immigrated to Los Angeles. And Judy, being Chicana, taught me so much about the history of Mexican Americans in Los Angeles. And she also taught me about collaboration, because working at SPARC, it was like a family, and we accomplished things together. And those are the kinds of things that I learned, and I try to pass along to my students here at Mesa College in my museum studies program. So I tried for us to work as a team. I tried for us to contribute, and I just, as an aside, I want to also thank my students who are here in my museum studies class who helped put together the exhibition, and also Pat Vine and my work study students, and Susan Merland, who also helped with the exhibition. Well, without any more stories from me, I'd like to introduce Judith Baca. Thank you so much.
Well, it's a great pleasure to be here. And it's also wonderful to have the show curated by Alessandra, who curated and worked for us in our gallery at SPARC. And as I told her, I could not have curated the show myself, because I would have chosen the pieces I liked best and made no sense of all of it. And I owe the fact that the show is here to her good curation, and also to Cesar and Adriana, who are here. One of your professors, Cesar Lopez, is here, who actually began, the two of them put together my archive. So there is a Judy Baca archive, thanks to people from San Diego now. Sorely missed in Los Angeles, but I have a great feeling of gratitude tonight about this. I want to talk tonight about sites of public memory, and give you a sense for me of how I began to do this kind of work. And I've been talking about my work essentially lately as the fact that I'm a political landscape painter. And when I talk about political landscape, I think that the reason this occurred was because of where I grew up in Los Angeles. Los Angeles was probably founded on the banks of a river that looked like this. In the summer, it expanded. It contracted. In the winter, it expanded. And the river was central to, like all cities, the creation of the city to begin with was formulated on its banks. I grew up alongside of the Los Angeles River, and I watched its transformation, and was one of the people who understood that the river wasn't always concrete, that it was, in fact, and part of its history, a flowing river that was alive and that put water and nutrients into the soil and into the aquifer, and that it was a living thing. The Tongva people and the Chumash lived alongside the banks of the river, The very first settlements that became the Pueblo of Los Angeles were formulated by the Tongva people. And this is actually photographs that were taken around the time of the camera in the 1800s, and some of the elders of the tribes that still existed. The people were wise. They moved with the expansions up the valleys, up away from the river, and they came back in the summer, and they moved their camps according to the way that the river lived. It was a harmonious life for thousands of years. This is a woman who was, we found in the archives of USC, who is a Tongva woman. She was named as a Gabrielino Nation woman, which was actually a name given her because she was associated with the mission, the San Gabriel mission. And it's a very interesting image in the fact that she is naked to the waist. She looks straight at our face, and it's a questionable image. Who is she? What is her name? Why is she looking at us? Why is she unclothed in the 1800s at the time of the camera? She might be a mestiza, she may be a mixed race, but an image that is a powerful image of an anonymous woman who we renamed Toypurina for a woman who led a revolt against the Mission San Gabriel in 1743. She couldn't have been this person because, of course, there was no camera at that time. But today, this anonymous woman is well known in many circles, including the Tongva circles, as Toypurina. You see her among the mission fathers who are surrounding her from the Mission San Gabriel, the mission at the horizon line, and the tattoos on her are drawings of the neophytes of these missions. The missions were known as the houses of death, and of course were responsible in the settlements of us going in Southern California from an area of 500,000 indigenous people to less than a handful of people, a few thousand in 50 years. The settlement moved north from the original Tongva villages and formulated a town that was called Sonora Town. And this is an image of Sonora Town. And you'll note that something strange is happening in terms of the way this is built. The doorways are 5 feet off the ground. And this has to do with the fact that the river overflowed its banks on a regular basis. And in order to keep their houses from being flooded, this was just calculated and built into the planning of the first settlements. In the early 20s, there was a major flood in Los Angeles. And at this time, Los Angeles had already been identified as a place that was going to be known for its real estate. The city fathers had come, people had come from the east to settle the Los Angeles region, and real estate was determined to be one of its greatest assets. And as a result of that, the real estate had to be protected. And so, systematically, the river was tamed. And our city fathers made a decision that has affected people for generations. It's affected the living bay and the quality of our water in the Santa Monica Bay. It's affected the aquifer and the regions that are now arid. It has affected everything from mosquito abatement to the kinds of plants that grow, and changed everything in the city of Los Angeles. This was the largest public works project in America at this point, in which systematically every existing arroyo was concreted. What was left were these kinds of spaces, the spaces that created concrete conduits where rivers once ran. And alongside of it, dirt belts on either side, which actually divided up communities. So that many times what was a gentle crossing through rocks in a small stream became a hike around the river to a crossing area miles away. And this is an example here in a place called the Tangawash Reach. And it's actually in Studio City in the Los Angeles area in the San Fernando Valley. And on one side is residential, and on the other side are two schools. So that people who go to Valley College, for example, have to hike miles around to cross at Burbank in order to walk into the residential area. In 1974, the Army Corps of Engineers had completed the massive building project. They had concreted all of the existing rivers, all of the existing arroyos. And unlike the maker, the original maker, who stood at the end of the seventh day and said, I look at my work and see that it is good, they finished and said, there's something wrong with what we have done. And for a very brief moment, the Army Corps of Engineers began to consider how they could mitigate the circumstances of divided communities, of the loss of the water into the aquifer. And it was at that time that they approached me as the director of the city's mural program to consider what we might do at this particular site. So I began to work with the Army Corps of Engineers and the flood control district to develop a park-like area that would go along both sides and actually to create a mural on the side of this wall. The idea for the mural came from my experience of working with the kids in East Los Angeles. This is a young man who is my friend and someone I have known for his whole lifetime now. He's a man in his late 40s. But early on, he was a young boy associated with White Fence. And that is a very well-known gang, a historic gang. And you can see the WF on his arm and his street name, Wolf. And he worked with me on one of my first murals. And during that mural, he actually wandered into the wrong territory and was attacked by an opposing gang. He was stabbed 13 times. And he nearly died from those wounds as a young man. And actually healed enough to come back to the site of the first mural I was painting called Mi Abuelita in Hollenbeck Park. When he came back, I said, how are you doing? Jackie, how are you doing? How are you feeling? He said, I'm okay, I'm physically well. He said, but every time I take off my shirt, it's a map of violence. And he said, I think we have to do something to these scars. Would you design me a tattoo to cover this scar, the one that is closest to my heart? And so I began to design tattoos for Jackie. And the story is kind of a funny story because as each year went by, we would design another tattoo. And he would love to come to the mural sites, lift up his shirt and say, I'm Judy Baca's greatest artwork. And it was really that idea of a tattoo on a scar of violence that created my concept or thought that if this was a river once, and that it had turned into a scar, and that it was really, in a sense, a violent act against the earth, that perhaps we could tattoo the scar where the river once ran. And so in 1976, we began systematically to do that, to look at the stories of the people and connect it to the destroyed river. Because if you could destroy a river, how much easier was it to destroy the stories of the people? And even to this day, if you think about Los Angeles, the first thing you'll think about is Disneyland or Universal City. And you'll forget the fact that this is a town settled by mulattoes, African American and Latino, by indigenous people. And the stories of those people are not recorded in the physical places that they occurred. So the Great Wall, its intention was to recover those stories and, in a sense, heal our river in a metaphoric way. So here we are in 1976 on the dirt belt with the first teams of the Great Wall, beginning to develop the parks on either side to reclaim the dusty and dirty divisions and to begin to make a bike trail from which to, and walking trail from which to view the long narrative work. This is actually us in process. The park in the development, and systematically, summer by summer, over 5 summers and over 15 years, we produced a work that is now 2,740 feet long, or half a mile of narrative, chronicling the stories of ethnic people who built the United States and who specifically had very key roles in the state of California. And this is my team's. The story of this work is an important story not only about the historical information that is recorded in sometimes the only place in Los Angeles in the Great Wall, but also the stories of the people who made this work together across race, across class, and across neighborhood divisions that became important, a very important set of acts that created a large monument to interracial harmony. So here we are with the kids. And I love looking at these pictures because I can now name what has happened to these kids over many years. The young boy in the center with the little red stripes is a set designer for Sony Pictures. He's working as a giant mural painter still. The young African-American girl in the background has her own software design company as a graduate of UCLA. A couple of the other kids are teachers. And so over the years, the family of the Great Wall has stayed connected. And I have the pleasure of working with them again because the Great Wall now has been declared a site of historic importance and has been funded by the California Cultural Historical Endowment with a $1.2 million for its restoration right at the moment. So as I am speaking here today, the Great Wall is in the midst of its restoration. And the first 1,000 feet, which is now 33 years old, is in the process of being rejuvenated and brought back to full color and to full strength by not only the alumni of the Great Wall, but also the children of the Great Wall. So this is early historical photographs. There's a photograph from Life magazine in the early 80s as I was producing the Dust Bowl refugee segment. And the content, of course, is historical material, sometimes of stories little known. The story of the deportation of what is actually, some people report, as much as 500,000 people who were deported in the 1930s of Mexican descent, many of them legal citizens who were swept up in an anti-Mexican period because of the economic downturn of the 30s. And so people were taken across the border on the trains. The Los Angeles newspaper, the Imperial newspaper wrote, "Officers hurl back alien hordes." The metaphors, of course, are like negative metaphors. A horde is not exactly, an alien horde is kind of a scary idea. And this represents the drawings as they're being transferred to the wall by young kids, 14 through 21 years of age, who are coming from the neighborhoods of Los Angeles, the juvenile justice system, the poverty programs, who provided us with the support to make all our workers paid workers over the period of time that we were painting. So this is a completed work with the hands of young people helping to create that work. $4.95 is the amount that the Southern Pacific Railroad made for each of the people that were deported. The Japanese internment is depicted here at the moment that people were taken off the buses and found themselves during World War II, the Japanese finding themselves in Manzanar. And from a story told to us by Amy Ishii, a wonderful poet and writer who wrote a book called Camp Notes and came and read it to our young people so they could understand what it meant to be in Manzanar in the 1940s. This is a segment done in a 9-week period by 50 young people with 5 artists who are leading these teams. The opportunities existed for kids to come on as a crew member and then to rise up in the Great Wall ranks to a crew leader and then to a supervisor and to help be leadership in the production of the Great Wall in the future. Many of those kids will be leading the efforts for our restoration and for the continuation of the Great Wall, which is now moving into its next panels on the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. Now, I'm showing this work because I want you to see the historical precedent of the work we're doing in the next panels I'm going to show you, which will take us all the way in to contemporary monuments that we're working on that are now technologically inspired. So this is the division of the Barros with showing Chavez Ravine being changed by the Dodger Stadium, which is descending into the oldest Mexican community in Los Angeles in the historic battle to save that area in the 1950s. Here's the forebearers of civil rights. Paul Robeson is in the foreground as he is being blacklisted in the 1950s. Big Mama Thornton is depicted with a microphone. She, of course, was the first voice and the person who made famous "You Ain't Nothing But a Hound Dog" before Elvis Presley. Charles White's image is holding up Watts. The figures to the right are Rosa Parks, who won't give up her seat, Gwendolyn Brooks, the first Pulitzer Prize winner, Ralph Bunche, the first Nobel Prize winner, and in the back of the bus, coming from the very back, is Martin Luther King, who will be, of course, a key figure in the 1960s. As I said, the Great Wall story now is a story about the kids who made it as well. This is Ernestine Jimenez. Ernestine here is 14 years old. She is pregnant, and she is a young woman I met in a detention center. As I went through the detention center, Ernestine was one of the people that the counselor said, this person is not a good candidate for your program. She's not a good candidate because she has had her brother killed in interracial warfare between African Americans and Latinos. She's not a good candidate because she's a gang member. She's not a good candidate because she doesn't respond to her counseling. She's not a good candidate because she's pregnant and she's using drugs. And I thought, she's exactly a candidate. And Ernestine joined our crew at 14. And this is Ernestine over the years. Because no kid is a throwaway kid. No person is someone not worthy of some support to change. This is Ernestine at 16 years old with her son 2 years old. This is Ernestine at 18, now a supervisor, running her own crew. And this is Ernestine at 45 with a grown son and speaking about the experience of the Great Wall to the National Hispanic Heritage Foundation, where I am receiving an award for being Educator of the Year. Ernestine was filmed at the site, and she spoke about the experience of working on the Great Wall. And this is Ernie in her own words as a grown woman.
The way I grew up is, you know, you fight through life. You know, I've got 10 brothers and 6 sisters, and I'm the baby. And it was a fight in my house all the time. And that's the way I believed you're supposed to have grown up, to fight through life. Don't like nobody but your own race. And even sometimes don't even like your own race. There was a lot of tension. I think everybody wanted to fight everybody, just the way they looked, or the way they looked at them, or the way they dressed. And after time, you just started getting to know that person as an individual instead of knowing them as you were taught to, you know. And everybody became very good friends. So it took a lot of growing up. I'm not saying that first year did it, because it didn't. It took a lot of growing up. But I made a lot of friends through the 4 years, and every year I understood something else, every year. I wouldn't have went back to high school because I wouldn't have had a role model to push me to go there. Education was Judy's #1 thing. As long as I stood in school, you can come back and paint the mural. And that's what, even though I got in trouble in school and fought and everything, that was my #1 goal. I wanted to come back. I had to come back. What really kind of freaked me out, though, is when I met the people that, when we painted the mural of the Holocaust, and I met the people that had the tattoos on them, that kind of blew my mind. That made me cry. Because I know there was another world that was harder than mine. And I just really felt for it. This mural opened my eyes so much. Even when I'm down and out, I still walk by here. And I thank God I did accomplish something in life. And it makes me feel good. And I think if it wasn't for this mural, for me to have my name on it and to have accomplished something, I don't know where I'd be.
So Ernie is part of our crew that will be helping us do the restoration and the extension of the Great Wall as one of our alumni, and speaking to the young people today about how they can contribute and the life experience that she had. Now, she didn't become a PhD and she didn't get through the university, but the fact that Ernie is living and that she is a citizen and a caretaker of older senior Jewish citizens, we're very proud of, and we're very happy to have her on our crew. This is contemporary version of the production on the Great Wall. And what I'm going to show you just for a moment is how this process has now been changed to advance into the technological world and to make it possible for us to work in new ways that include technology and actually speed the process and help us do it in a different way. This is my UCLA students. This is our lab, the Cesar Chavez Digital Mural Lab. And on the giant screen behind us, we're actually envisioning new segments of the Great Wall. And the photographs, the little film that I'm going to show you, the little clip, is actually taken by my students with their cell phones, and the audio comes from that. So very often, I'm not even knowing where the sound is coming from, and we're being recorded. But this is a wonderful little snippet as we're working in the classroom, and we'll see it in development. The new segments for the 1960s. And this is about civil rights, and this is about the imaging of new historical content.
You want to work on it. And it doesn't matter if they're connected, okay? Because what you're going to do is you're going to go and conceptualize this part a bit further. And
This is
when
a
we come back
virtual
again,
mural.
one of the next steps is that we'll have a conceptualized piece, which means that you found either drawings, you've made drawings if you can draw. And incidentally, if you can't draw and you need help with drawing, call on us. I'll come in and help you draw something. Carlos can draw pretty well. I don't know who else draws. We self-identify as people who draw. And we'll come and give you a hand. Or use photographic references and start to put it together so that you have a visualization of that segment. We're going to go now to a scale that is bumped up, not 5 inches. So we're getting a little braver. We're going to go for 10 inches, okay? And 1 inch is only a foot. And then it'll be about 30 inches long. And we'll create the templates in the computer, or you can do 2 things. I want you to do the template in the computer, but you could start with the templates of drawing and then scan it, and then put it into the computer if you wanted to do it that way with photographic, with drawings as your basis, and then come back to putting the images within it. So now we're going to go and fill it out. So let me just ask people, is it sort of apparent to you where you want to go, or do you want me to assign things, or what do you want to do?
You can see we're working with timelining, historical references. We're beginning to do drawings from those pieces. We, in fact, even use ourselves as people to enact certain aspects of the content, and we can see it now on a wireframe wall, envisioning what it might look like, put it on the internet, ask people to participate with us. This is the Watts Riots, and begin to give us feedback on what we have forgotten, what we need to include. And so this is the first draft of UCLA students for the 1960s segment. And we can look at the scale and its relationship to the murals on the other side and fly through it using Maya programs and animation programs. So the Great Wall continues. And the Great Wall will continue on the opposite side, become a full mile long in its completion. It will be painted by the children of the Great Wall. My dream is to be able to stand alongside of the channel, watch it in production, and not have to be as an old lady standing on the scaffolding and seeing another generation interpreting the history of California. If you look here, you can see our new bridge. This is a bridge that has been funded and is in process. It will be groundbreaking in May. It's been completely designed, and it's made from the refuge from the river. And the purpose of the bridge is an interpretive site to help us make the relationship between the river and the people, because the people and the river are connected. So now, from the site, there will be a photophylactic bridge, which will be lit at night. The rails are made from the shopping carts that float down the river. Glass, plastic bottles, the debris of the river will be indicated in the time that it becomes apparent in the sedimentation of the, you can see on the front part of the bridge, we're marking the sedimentation as if you're looking into the land and looking at a cross-section of the history of the geography of the area. So for the first time, the connection between the stories of the people and the story of the river will be made visible on the public site. So today, it's possible for us to do this work in an entirely different way, and so that restoration will not have to be done 35 years from now in a massive repainting project. This is Denver International Airport, and it is the first opportunity that I had in my working life as an artist to produce a work that was the story of my own family. And I think this notion of being a political landscape painter and understanding, for example, that the land has memory, that all cultures actually believe that if you go to a historical site, a place where something important occurred, that you learn something being in the place where it happened, that somehow in the place that it occurred, the memory is embedded. And I think this comes from, for me, in my lifetime, from this woman. And this is my grandmother, Francisca. And she was a woman who was a very powerful healer and a person who knew very intuitively how to nurture all things small and living. And I would walk with her. I was born in Watts. I'd walk through the streets of Watts with her, and she would take clippings from plants, for example, and she would ask the permission of the plant to take them. She would bring them back to our porch, where she had mini coffee cans filled with soil that she had composted, and she would plant a dry twig, and within days the little twig would become a living plant. And so it's through Francisca that I began to understand that the land had memory, and that in some way we had to be reciprocal with it. And it's partially how I formulated this concept, the concept that if you are a public artist, that very often we're brought in at the top layers of this mountain to transform a physical site. It's at the time a shopping mall is being built. But in fact, really what is important is for us to consider all the layers of meaning as we work in any physical place. And it begins with the inherent nature of a place. In one of the areas that I worked in was in the Central Valley along the coast of California, in a place called Guadalupe. It's one of the most fertile valleys in the world. You can grow from a seedling to a finished plant within 70 days a cauliflower or a broccoli. And that inherent nature is that it was a valley formulated by a glacier and incredibly fertile. The topography of the site today are the fields of Santa Maria and the artichokes and the cauliflowers and the broccolis that grow there. The spirit of the site, however, is perhaps one of the most important parts, which is that everybody, all things, people and other, that have lived in this site create the spirit of the place. And that if you are a good enough listener, you can begin to hear and feel the memory of the place. And above that is the current enactments on the site. Are you going to build a shopping mall on the site, and they're asking an artist to come and paint the shopping mall or do something that would somehow save the soul of the development? And the third level is, what does the artist see? But only with the consideration of all those other layers of meaning. In the Denver International Airport, I was commissioned to produce a work on what they call the Hispano history of the Southwest. And this was the first time that I could actually tell my own family story. And it was kind of a challenge for me because I told everyone else's stories, but I'd never worked on my own experience and my own family's, in a sense, kind of family lore. The stories of a family are told over and over again. And the question is there substance in those stories? Could we find the truth of the story? And so this is the Jepson terminal. If you're waiting in security, you'll stand in front of this piece. And it's a digital work, meaning that the work is produced in a digital print. It is first a painted work. It's a combination of both digital paintings and hand-painted paintings. Here at the gallery, you see the original painting that was produced at half scale, a maquette, as it were, for the larger work. And what I began was with the concept that the land had memory. And I began by looking at what it must have been like for my grandparents to make the journey during the Mexican Revolution, which is the journey that so many people made, hundreds of thousands of people made in the first major migration into the Southwest. And they came through the Santa Fe Trail from Chihuahua. They went through the Ellis Island of the Southwest, El Paso. They went north into a place called La Junta, Colorado. They were moving toward the Luisa Maria Baca land grant, which I believe that my great-grandfather had an affiliation with, and where he would bring water with his Clydesdale horses to the southeastern arid region of Colorado. Or, in fact, probably we owned half of Denver at some point with that land grant. The land grants, as you know probably, or some of you don't know, were given to people during the Spanish rule in Mexico in the northern outposts for their achievements within, that distinguishes them in the military or in other service in their country. So, and California and Colorado were still part of Mexico. So if you look here, we're looking at images that are embedded into this story. The first image is the Chihuahuan miner. The second is Corky Gonzalez and Cesar Chavez. And the third is the Cheyenne woman. And the last is a railroad worker's image, in which, if you see a little square around it, is a picture of my grandfather. This was I found in a historical museum in Colorado of the railroad, and found my grandfather on the first box with him facing the camera in a photograph of his co-workers. The miner is a Chihuahuan miner who finds himself working in the mines in Colorado. The landscape is a landscape of a collision of different parts of the travel that they made leaving their homeland. And as if they were walking, they were riding on the train, they were moving through this landscape. All of these landscapes are colliding. This is them making the crossing and walking on water, a difficult crossing. They arrived in Juarez. They found themselves in the midst of a battle that was happening there. And while they did not plan to cross initially, they made the crossing. And you see in the river the Cheyenne woman, who is from the Sand Creek Massacre that occurred on the corner of the Luisa Maria Baca land grant. And as we did the examination and studies, we found that there were amazing stories of Sand Creek and the massacre that occurred. And the only marker today of that particular massacre, in which 300 women and children were killed along this river, is a town called Covington, named after the colonel who led that charge against the Cheyenne people. So very often the real story, the story that is not told and is hidden, is something that needs to be revealed. This is the horno, or the oven. The corn represents the mestizaje, the mixture of the races, making a third race, the Spanish and the indigenous. There's my grandfather with the choices that he had when he came to Colorado. He could work in the fields, he could be a miner, or he could work in the railroad. My grandfather chose the railroad. He became a Gandhi dancer. And he died young there. He died in his 50s. And this is a story of Cesar Chavez and Corky Gonzalez. And for those of you who don't know the history, they're sort of like Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. Corky Gonzalez led the crusade for justice, and Cesar Chavez led the crusade for the farm workers. And they're discussing at the moment that they will bring the great boycott into Colorado. This is the Ludlow strike, another important historical event where the immigrants joined together to fight the struggles of people who were working in the mines. And it's actually out of which that song, my favorite song from that era, that says, you know, if you load 16 tons, what do you get? Another day older and a deeper in debt. People worked for the company store. They had to buy their food from the company store. They lived in company housing. And at the end of that period of time, there was very little money left to live on. And these immigrants all joined together from different places: Italians, Greeks, Mexicans, African American, indigenous people, to fight what was unfair practices. And today, still, you'll see people walking around in Colorado with T-shirts that say, "Remember Ludlow." The funeral below is the funeral of Ricardo Falcón, who was killed in my mother's hometown, stopping on his way to a protest. He stopped in the wrong gas station and was killed by a racist owner of the gas station because he was in the wrong place. So these stories are all parts of the stories that are embedded in the land, and perhaps is the reason why I began the process of doing this discovery for my family. But underlying the whole thing was the fact that my grandfather's grave and the graves of my mother's twin sisters and of her uncles and of her grandparents were segregated. The graves were in a little town in La Junta in which the Mexican graves were not maintained. So my mother went back for her high school reunion, where she attended segregated schools, where she could not sit in the theater except in the balcony, where she was taken out of the schools and had her hair dipped in kerosene because for fear that Mexicans had lice. And she became very upset about the fact that her father's grave was going fallow. So she began writing to the governor, just as I was beginning this work on Denver. And we made a part of our pledge is that at the dedication, we would recover my grandfather's grave. And this is the entire group of us who traveled to Denver to do that. The BBC came with us, and we marked my grandfather's grave, and we brought together the graves of the Familia Baca and remarked them. And now these graves are being maintained, and we have actual people watching to see that that is occurring. So we have, in a sense, done the reclamation. My mother is looking glamorous in the pink coat with her sisters and her brothers looking at, feeling very triumphant that she has gotten her father's grave back. This is also a website which we built at Harvard when I was in residence there. And this is actually a wonderful thing. I had no idea how it was going to be used, but you can click on the mural and you can discover the stories that are inside of it. So what used to be the materials that went into boxes and storage now are materials that actually can be used to teach. And remarkably, I had all kinds of experiences with young people using this material to uncover the story of Colorado. And in fact, as a result of that, in Durango, Colorado, I started to receive, while I was doing the Denver piece, emails from high school kids in the town called Durango. People lived along the base of the Los Alamos River. This is the river. It's a town of about 5,000 people. It's a historic place. It's very high, 8,000 feet. Between the two mountains, there's a reservation called the San Ignacio Reservation. And everyone lives in view of this mountain called Mother Mountain to some and Silver Mountain to others, depending on when your family came. The kids wrote me, Judy, we know the work you've done on the Great Wall, and we know the work you've done in Los Angeles, and we're having fights between the Navajos, the Utes, and Latinos and Anglos in our town, and we are starting to act like LA. And we're wondering if we couldn't do something ourselves about teaching us about each other's history and the parts that our families played, and we want to make our own land and memory piece. So I went to Colorado in a snowstorm, flew into Durango, and found myself at the base of this mountain, and began to meet with the kids. And they were extraordinary kids, and extraordinary teachers available there. And I asked them to map their own town. And as they began to do these drawings, they began to tell when their families came. So each of those numbers circling around Mother Mountain is a drawing done by a different kid. This is done by a 16-year-old, and it shows his father being a Gandhi dancer working on the railroad. The opposite drawing shows a family that came on a covered wagon. His grandfather came in a covered wagon. We took these and we put them over stone so that they look like pictographs, because they're very prominent pictographs in that region. And we turned these, we looked at photographs, historic photographs, and found that people had been shooting from Mother Mountain for years. So from the mountaintop we could find historical photographs. And we looked in the computer and looked very closely. We could see the Ute encampments along the edge of this land base. The kid said, "You draw Mother Mountain." And I went back to Los Angeles. I couldn't stay in Durango because we didn't have any funding. So we were going to do this over the distance. And I did a drawing and I sent it to them on email. And I got back a note saying, "Oh, sorry, Professor Baca, but this one, we don't like her. She doesn't look Ute enough. You're going to have to redraw her." So I was getting my critiques from the kids and being told how to do it better. And indeed, she did look too Hispanic. They collected the family photographs and they began to drop them in to the land base And we found all kinds of wonderful things in their family albums. Picture of Ignacio in the upper left-hand corner, who was the chief of the Utes. We talked to the Ute elders and we learned about the cycle of life, how life is a continuum, not a beginning and an ending, but a continuum. We saw this beautiful, handsome cowboy in the foreground, somebody's uncle, looking out at the camera. We found this Hispanic wedding on the right. We found the Southern Utes relearning their language. We paired them with the historic and contemporary images of indigenous people, the cowboys in the sky, and all the different forms that the Anasazi sites. You can see the Ute encampment in the lower left-hand corner. I redrew Mother Mountain. This one passed. You can see she's quite different. And we took the piece out, printed it out, and painted it so that it actually became both photographic and painted. And here is the finished work of the cycle of life and the figures integrated. This is the painted cowboy who's looking out at the viewer. And as the dedication occurred and the people celebrated the Durango mural, Mr. Joe Victor Archuleta, 72 years old, began to be a very prominent man because he is the cowboy. And here he is looking out, actually holding court at the dedication. The piece was shipped in a tube. It was installed on the site. And now this work actually can be renewed at any time. And it also can be changed and updated as new groups come into the region. The land's memory is changing and enhancing, and this is a piece that is probably will last about 10 years in the method in this cold, icy area and also in its heat, and has now been renovated once already with postcard sales. So if you go into Durango, buy the postcards because you're supporting the reprinting of this piece on a regular basis. Again, in another community, in the diaspora of people coming from Central America, we had a harder story to tell, a story of people who escaped their war in El Salvador and live in the densest populated area in Los Angeles. These are young people who are the children of families from El Salvador who came in the 1980s. You see the timelining going on behind, the photographs being collected, but this time all the photographs are coming from people's family albums. And the question really is how to tell the story. How to tell the story of American involvement in El Salvador, how to tell the story of 75,000 people being disappeared. What do you put in the mural? What can we live with? What kind of imagery will tell the story truthfully and importantly for the next generation? This is a parent who is talking about what he thinks we should do.
Some of the violence is important because that's why I came to this country and that's why my family came here. Escaping a brutal, bloody war. And I would like to make sure that 20, 40, 50 years from now, when someone sees this, they see the images that these families were escaping. So I think that it is important. And I understand, putting that in the past and moving on. But those images, I can't forget them. I still remember the last few images that I saw when my father and I were fleeing the country. And then if it wasn't for that, I don't think I would be here.
The children were concerned about depicting the violence. And those who had come from it wanted it remembered. Now, these are all photographs collected from families who carried these photographs out when they were escaping really with very little, taking very little with them to come to the United States. These are people who were being disappeared. It's the moment of their disappearance. Many of them never seen again after this photograph was taken. The collection of these photographs, this is a memorial of a massacre in El Salvador. These are drawings done by people who escaped. remembering the story, the people disappeared on the left. The military, some of them a child, the soldiers. And the important thing was the selection of the imagery. And in this case, because it was first source material, as an artist, my job was to figure out, to work with the people to determine what was the most important thing to be included in the mural. This was not my story, it's not one I knew well, I didn't live through the war. But there were people who did, who were directing us and my team how to put together the imagery. This young woman was selected as the central figure of the new mural for the Central American Resource and Education Center. The photographs were included in what has now become the Historia Memoria archives, which is now going to be online so people can actually see the records that the people brought out. These are photographs of the imagery being painted at small scale. This is the finished work, and this is the migration of the golden people. You've seen the people coming out of El Salvador. You see Rigoberto Manchu weaving a story in the air as if it's a dream of people being disappeared. You see the Sabine tree, which is a magical Mayan tree with the pre-Hispanic images. The dead was a long discussion. How do we depict the lost people? And they are tiny little renditions of skeletons within the grassy areas. Faragundo Martí, Constance Ayala, and Sandino are depicted as the volcano. And the central figure is a young woman who lives despite this and gives new life in the face of paramilitary people behind her. Oscar Romero. And a mythological figure behind the young woman's head of the two dogs who actually follow you. They're mythological creatures who tell you kind of the future with their red eyes. Here it is installed in the 37-foot version by 15-foot version in the Central American Resource and Education Center. Here's our team looking at the work that they have done, leading the workshops with the young people to produce the work. So now, with the new technology, we're able to do things that we've never been able to do before with the painted mural. But it doesn't mean that we're leaving the painted mural. I just want to quickly go through images of a traditional mural still in progress, which is a work that is a traveling mural called the World Wall. And here it is installed in the Sculpture Gardens of Santa Barbara. In 1992, when the riots broke out in Los Angeles, it was installed there, and a spontaneous gathering, a candlelight vigil occurred. This is called the World Wall, A Vision of the Future Without Fear. And each country adds a work to it as it is at a moment of change. And the artists there depict the piece that talks about the experience of their country and this vision of future without fear to be added and moved with the traveling mural that moves around the world. The central image is this image. And this, I think, is one of my most favorite paintings. It's a painting of balance. And it came about because when I was trying to figure out what peace was, I was asking my students, well, what does peace look like? And everyone said, what does it look like? Does it look like everybody sitting around watching TV? What does peace look like? It's not active. It's like the absence of war. And after much discussion, we invited the Hopi elders. And the Hopi elders said, well, listen, this is easy. You should understand this, that peace is something that we struggle to maintain. It's about the achievement of balance, the balance of ourselves internally, but also the balance of our society, of the balance of our world between the living things and the earth, between the sun and the moon, between the things that grow on the earth and the people. And so this is a 30-foot panel that represents peace as defined by the elders of the Hopis, the crowning of a child in a child-honoring world, something for us to aspire to, the perfect plants growing on the earth that replenish the soil and not take from the soil. And this is another panel called Triumph of the Hands or Hearts, which is about a young African-American male, the most endangered man in America, a 24-year-old African-American, most likely to die from violent crime, is here leading the way with the light in the shadow of Gandhi against the winds of war. And the figures on the left represent each of us who are going through transformation of our own self-examination. The work traveled to Gorky Park. It premiered there at the fall of the Communist Party. Now, Babushka here is preparing for our morning arrival. 180,000 people will see it, and it will be the first American exhibition in the Soviet Union in a public place this way, the first Chicana exhibition there for sure. And it will have a work added by this wonderful artist named Alexei Begel. He's a Cossack artist, and he's painting a piece about what he sees for the future. And remarkably, what he paints is exactly what occurred. He said, "We are waiting for the end of the 20th century. The figures are craning their necks, looking up to the sky. The person with a cane is a person blind leading the Soviets, who will become the ex-Soviet Union. The child who's making the sign of the cross at the base is the child who's having the churches opened again, that religion is being allowed to come back. And the Soviet people crucified on the left. They're waiting for the end of the 20th century and for leadership of the future." This piece now travels with the world wall. There have been 9 editions from all over the world. This is the Finnish edition. The Finnish artists believed that we were in struggle with our higher and lower selves all over the world, and that man really had to find a way to move to their higher selves. Here are these artists working in Helsinki for their edition. These are the Israeli-Palestinian team working on the edition that comes from their home villages using the drawings of the children. They asked him to envision a future without fear, and they received a whole series of images of war. And then they began to try to figure out how to make a final image that would incorporate a hope for the future. And they created a work called Inheritance Compromise. And this is Fort Ord, where we have converted a military fort into a university, a state university. And the first work of the military tank buildings is this Israeli piece. And in this image, you see the drawings of black balloons, of confronting almost like whale-like images, black and white. You see fire, trees upside down. These are the children's images from the villages, both Palestinian and Israeli. And the central figures are white images representing the 3 men who are Israeli Arab, Israeli Jewish, and Palestinian. And they are together creating an image that is about them coming to a compromise. This is Suleiman Mansour, who's a Palestinian, mimicking the image of his father, who becomes a street sweeper after losing his olive fields. This is the edition from Mexico of 2 women, Marta Ramirez and Patricia Guijano, and it's actually about both sides of the border, the change of the importance of women's roles in the future in Mexico. The central image with the tattooed figures in the front is the women of Acteal. You see the yin and yang images. You see the rupture of the kind of arrow that comes down into the Coyoshacwe image. And you can see both sides of the border and the little footprints moving back and forth on this image. This is last year we installed it in Mexico City. And this is El Museo de la Ciudad as we set up the women's exhibition. So every time a new work is added, we exhibit it in the piece in the home country, bring the whole world wall with it of all the other artists. And this round table continues to move around the world. And the Canadian work is in progress right now. And very excitingly, they are working on global warming. Their central issue is what will occur. We are the people who are the keepers of the ice caps, and we have been a culture of extraction. And we are people who have to be the guardians of this precious land. In our research, we flew over areas that had been clear-cut in the wilderness in British Columbia and looked at the changes that occurred over a 30-year period. So the green area is an area that was clear-cut 30 years ago. The one in front of it recently clear-cut. And of course, the changes in the land are devastating. The world wall will continue to keep traveling. I'm going to say that the Canadians piece, I love it because I don't know what it will be yet, but what they are saying, essentially, is that the working title is that the Inuit sent us a canary, a culture of extraction. And how do we transform from that? That's what they're saying. How do we stop being the takers from the earth and not the givers of the earth? This is about world peace, and so we took the work back to Lincoln Park, where all this work originated for me, in East Los Angeles, in the first works I painted. And this is a night installation in Lincoln Park, where young people are talking about what peace is. What does peace look like in the future? And they're talking about peace in our communities and peace on an international level. Little peace symbols here as these children are talking about this. I'm going to conclude my presentation tonight with the newest work of the Cesar Chavez Digital Lab that will be coming here to San Diego, hopefully, on Martin Luther King. And it is a giant mural-like image that will be on the 94 freeway, the Martin Luther King freeway. And it's like it's a cutout work that depicts Martin Luther King in a peace garden in the foreground, to be seen as you're traveling at speed through San Diego. And it's Martin Luther King at his moment of evocation as a fifth-generation preacher, as he's speaking and motivating an entire generation of people, and who he continues to motivate. The garden will be a garden of dreams. It will have images from children. The figures on the left are the Montgomery bus boycott, and the figures on the right, the March and Selma. I'm also working now with my team on the memorial for Robert F. Kennedy, and perhaps the greatest challenge I've ever experienced of telling a story of the memory of the land exactly at the point in which America suffered a tremendous loss of Robert F. Kennedy, exactly on the site where Robert Kennedy was killed. This is the Ambassador Hotel. This is the kitchen that Bobby Kennedy turned down to be assassinated by Sirhan Sirhan. And as evidence is going to be revealed probably within the next week or two, you're going to be hearing more news material on the fact that there's now clear evidence that there was more than one shooter, and that there were 13 shots fired, and Sirhan did not act alone. And this is actually being led by Paul Schrade, who was shot with Robert Kennedy and lived. He was shot first. And this is the place exactly where this mural will reside. Bobby Kennedy was a hope. He was to be probably the next president. He'd just won the primary in California when he gave his triumphant speech. And at that moment, after his short speech, with Dolores Huerta standing alongside of him, he walked into the kitchen to be shot. The two arches in this will become the new Robert F. Kennedy Memorial Center, and it will also become the library for K through 12 children. And Tiny Ripples of Hope is the first image, which has to do with an enlightened leader, people holding him up with their dreams. And it comes from his speech. He said, "Each time a man stands for another's lot or stands up against an injustice, he sends forth a tiny ripple of hope that can become a wave that can bring down the mightiest walls of oppression." And so this is what we tried to work with. And we are working in light, both digitally and hand-painted imagery that will show the light of hope inside of the hands of all types of people who are holding up Bobby Kennedy at the moment of his winning of the primary. And also the fact that Bobby Kennedy went through this movement from the darkest recesses to the highest light, as in the lotus blossom here that comes up out of the mud and the darkness and comes to the light. And so we're using a lotus blossom leaves to construct the imagery. We are dealing with what he said were the most significant issues affecting our world. And fascinatingly, they are the issues that we still face. He said, your generation will have to face the issues of a deteriorating environment. You will have to face the conclusions on healthcare. What should we do as a country about healthcare? We must deal with poverty. We must deal with intolerance that we need to transform and finally make resolution to. And of course, war and education. And so of course, if you look at these issues, wouldn't they be similar to those we face today? So we are working to image right now. They're not complete. These are sort of proposals. of seeing through the eyes of a person or something, like in our case, so the first one, an environment, we're seeing through the eyes of a polar bear to the ice caps. We're seeing it through the eyes of an aged person to healthcare. We're looking through the eyes of Oscar Romero to the immigrant issues and to tolerance, as this is the young man who cradled Kennedy at the moment of his death. And this work, this is the million-person march in Los Angeles, from photographs we took the day of the march. And this is Bobby Kennedy breaking bread with Cesar Chavez as he helps him break the fast to end the boycott against grapes in California. This is what the image will look like. Again, the technology making it possible for you to see it before it exists and for us to plan how this will work. We're entering what is becoming a library. This is the library has now been built. The rest of the school is not up, but it will be a memorial to what Kennedy stood for, and not to his death, but to his life. And as you enter this room, you will see two giant 55-foot arches, and they will face each other and speak to each other, one about hope and the other about compassion. To the right of the pillars is where he was murdered. This will also be the Robert F. Kennedy archive. Seeing through others' eyes and tiny ripples of hope. I'm going to complete my presentation with the most recent work just dedicated this year and now in its final stages of its last mosaics, the largest monument to Cesar Chavez, a piece that has been constructed at San Jose State University and now is on campus. And it's a Mayan corbelled arch, and it just was dedicated. It's a Mayan corbelled arch and with colonial mission niches, combining both his indigenous roots and the Spanish colonial mission systems. This is Dolores Huerta with the mosaic of Cesar Chavez. This is our 3-ton glass eagle from the United Farm Workers symbol. Well, that concludes my presentation, and I want just a little aside before we close and I take questions, is that I took Dolores the day of the dedication to see the piece, and I said, when I was painting Dolores, do you want to be young or would you like to be older when I paint you? And she said, I don't know. So I finally said, it's D-Day, Dolores, I must know, will you be a young woman or will you be an older woman in the image? And she said, make me young so that the young women who pass it will remember that this is their job now. The work must be continued and they need to do it now. And so Dolores was painted in her 20s. And when she saw the image, she looked up and she said, "Oh my goodness, that's just way too big. I can't stand looking at myself that big." But thank you for your attention for them.
Judith, I'll begin.
Hi.
Hi, my name is Lydia Bode. Would you even bother to classify, but if you were going to, would you classify yourself as an artist who is a Chicana or as a Chicana artist?
Is there a difference?
You know, what made me think of it was the president at some point during the election process talked about about being a man who is black as opposed to a black man, and there have been a couple of things that came from that, and it just occurred to me, because I've seen your work for years, and it is typically representing some sort of it's very thematic, it's very contextual, and usually related to your background. But I don't know if I'm not sure, that's why I began by saying I'm not sure you would even bother to classify yourself. But
I wouldn't. I think it's important to recognize that what happens is that an artist works from the well, right? The well of experience, the well of culture, and the well that I come from is clearly being a person of the Southwest, of Mexican descent, born on this side of the border, Francisca's grandchild. The story that I tell are the stories that I know, and increasingly stories that expand to resonate on a worldwide level about interracial work, about work across struggle and difference and conflict, whether it's a neighborhood struggle or it is a global struggle. So I think it's, my heritage is important to know where it springs from, where the richness comes from in this making is being a Chicana of California, of this time. Yes, in front of her.
My name is Starla Lewis. We met earlier.
Yes, we met.
It was a very moving experience for me because I like to ride the trains to LA, so I get to see the mural on a regular basis. So it has much deeper meaning for me now after I've listened to the stories. But on a personal note, as you talk about it, the reason I feel compelled to share is because our students seem to think things happened so long ago. But as you were talking about your family story, I was remembering being that little girl sitting in the balcony in the segregated room.
Oh, yes.
You know, I was born in a colored hospital. You know, I remember the civil rights movement so vividly and how it transformed my thinking and my life. And I actually had my prom in the hotel where Robert Kennedy was assassinated, the year he was assassinated. So I think it's very important to realize that we're living history. And that, and when I heard your question, we are our history. We are that well. We are African and American and human, and it doesn't matter which order we identify it, because there is no order. It's all one whole thing. And I think that we struggle with that question because Europeans never have to be asked that question.
Right.
They automatically see themselves as human, and they automatically see themselves as artists because of the way we have defined the reality here. But in a bigger picture, my humanity is just understood.
Yeah.
And my story needs to be told, and no one else can tell it.
That's lovely. Thank you. Thank you for that. You said it much better than I did. And I add this aside that after we did the reclamation of my grandfather's grave, two things really overwhelmed me. One was the experience of recognizing that even in death, the ashes of people couldn't be mixed. That's how critical that idea was in this little town. And I took my mother to the theater that she could never sit only in the balcony. And Selena was playing in the theater. I said, let's go see Selena. It seemed appropriate. That would be the first time she could sit in the regular part of it. We came and we sat downstairs, and the movie came up. And my mother said to me, Judy. Judy. I said, yes. She said, this isn't such a big deal. Why did they not let me sit here? This is the woman whose my grandmother collected rainwater for her beautiful hair, who had her head dipped in kerosene. So that's the experience in her lifetime. And I'm her daughter. It's in me on a cellular level. Because I'm her daughter. And I'm Francisca's daughter. So that's, as long as I can keep working from that place, I'm telling you truth. Any questions? Yes?
What truly inspires you to keep pushing every day to change, manipulate the factors of what someone thinks? When you're on the current job, what inspires you to get it done? What motivates you to do that everyday push to say, I can change the way one person or 1,000 people will think. I can change the way someone will feel emotionally, physically, mentally. What pushes you to keep that factor going every day? And I know everyone has a motivation and a more inspiring, a hidden inspiration to keep going every day and to fight for something better, to fight for something stronger. And I was just curious because you do excellent work, and I wanted to know what pushed you to show other people that there's always a possible tomorrow, there's always a better.
Well, I'm going to answer you, but I want to ask you the same question, because it might be different. But in every case, I mean, I probably started the Great Wall pissed off. Okay. My mother said I was getting even with the San Fernando Valley for its segregation and for the experiences I had in a place that was not a terribly desirable place to live. It was very segregated. I lived in a black covenant laws of the San Fernando Valley in the 1950s, in which the lines were designated. And it wasn't until I did the Great Wall that I understood that why when I crossed Laurel Canyon, it was white people, and it was, there were no African Americans and Latinos. And across the other side of the street was all my neighborhood, which was different. Lockheed Aircraft Industry created designated areas of housing for African American and Latino. And that's where we lived, right? Designated and planned. But I started pissed off, but you can't sustain work in anger. I fell in love. I fell in love with the process, and I fell in love with the people. And what has sustained the work, really, as corny as it can be, is love. Absolute joy and love of the work. I mean, I get to get up every day and work out a dream and play in the dream and make things happen. And I also have all these people, whenever I get weak and tired, there are people like behind me going, okay, Judy, when are we doing this and what's happening? And there are all these young people, and they're like, okay. And I get drugged along, even when I'm feeling weak and pathetic, which I do sometimes. I feel tired. I get tired of raising money. That's my thing I really hate the most. But it is a labor of love, and it's one in which it's sustaining because there's continually feedback. I've lived long enough now to meet the children of the Great Wall. And I've seen how it affected them. I can hear people tell me, when Ernestine says, you said that I had to stay in school. I don't even remember doing that. I must have made it up one day when she was trying to quit school. I mean, and then you recognize that those words have such power. They have such power. So you choose them carefully, and you recognize that it has meaning in people's lives. Now, what sustains you?
Well, for me to keep doing my work every day, for me to continue drawing as an artist, a writer, is the fact that I can always change the way that one person may feel. Because I know everybody, regardless who you are, how great your life is, someone's had a conflict at some point in their life, someone's had some point where they were down because of what someone said to them, something they went through in their life. And for me to feel that I can craft something or say one word, maybe two, to change the way that someone thinks, and make their next day, the next chapter of their life, that much better, it keeps me going. It's a push. To feel that I can constantly inspire somebody every day through my work, something I can do, it's enlightening, it's warming, and it says peace is coming, happiness is coming, and soon everyone will understand. I write and I understand people, and for me to say something and everyone be like, yeah, that's right. For them to wake up in the morning with a smile on their face when they haven't done that for years, it makes me feel better. And I painted a 17x9 foot mural of hands. It was inspiration. I gave up on it 4 or 5 times. I won't lie, I wanted to quit. But my inspiration was my teacher who inspired me, because I went through hard times myself, family going through troubles, and she kept a hand on my back. She kept me going. And it was a gift to her to show everyone has inspiration. Everyone has something that's possible to be accomplished. You may not know when it is, how, or where, but if you push them each day with your head up and you say, it's possible, I've seen people do it, and I myself can do it, then the future is inevitable.
That's good. Thank you. Thank you. All the way in the back? Stand up and speak loud.
Hey, everyone. I have something to contribute to that. I think it's incredibly crucial for not only us to understand what is it that motivates us, but also our peers to understand, like you said, the words that you said were taken so highly and you could, not ever remember. And I couldn't tell you how many of us here, I believe, could remember at least one statement that was discouraging to us in one way or another that we interpreted in our own way without elaborating or communicating and remembering that 10 times more than something positive that a peer told us. It's very hard to continue encouraging ourselves. And I think that the way, and personally I keep my self motivated, is not thinking about others or myself, but thinking about what is needed. And more than anything, I realize that the documentation is what's needed. The documentation of our times, of our history, because we are living history, as you said. We are, completely, and we're not. We just don't know. We've come to a position where I feel like we don't know how to express ourselves anymore. We're not being taught. We want to know. It's like we're in a society where we come to think that we have to learn from a peer or a mentor. And we're kind of like here, all in school, waiting for that epiphany, for that incredible mentor, that person that knows what they're doing, not because they know what they're doing, but to have a passion in what they're doing. You have grew to love what you were doing. I'm doing what I am because I'm pissed off right now. As you can tell, I am, 100%. And I'm searching for that moment of like, wow, here I am. This is what I want to do. And I want to have a purpose. And it's not about wanting it, it's about realizing that we do have a purpose. We do. It is those young women that need to look. It is our peers that need to remind us. It's like, we have Chicano studies, but what is this classification? Do we need it? Do I even identify with it? No. And I don't think that a lot of us do in general. And I have to come back to say, you know what? We all are a little bit discouraged from all our economics. And hello, but we need to bitch out our teachers and they need to bitch us out because we need to get up. We're not doing anything. We're not doing anything. We are all, as one race, stupid and smart. We're not better than one another. We're all going at a constant rate and we're, instead of just nipping and picking at each other. And that's it. It's like, hello, wake up. It's not about being positive or negative, it's about documenting. Documenting and expressing what you're living through, who you are. Because whether it matters to you or not, the fact that it's there is what matters. Somebody is going to come next. And it's that, just the possibility of something else should be enough for us. I'm sorry.
Well, if you're pissed off, that's a good start. That's a good start. It's not something, it's motivation, right? It's adrenaline.
Yeah.
So you have to direct it. And being pissed off is not going to sustain you.
It's not.
And you have to find the well. Where's the well? right? Where do you get it? Your Chicano studies is something that will help you if you understand where you have been. Because if you don't know where you've been, you can't see where you're going. You know, there's a magnificent image. It's a Mayan image in Bonampak. It's the first mural in the Americas, 1100 AD. And the figure is holding a child. And the child is looking out to the valley. And it's a pre-Hispanic space. This is an ancient image. And he is showing the child his history. He's saying, this is where you have come from. And an enemy of this group came and carved out the eye because they didn't want the child to see. Now, that is how important it is to take away your history. If we want to ensure that you will never be powerful, that you will never know, take your eye away from seeing your history. So you go to your Chicano studies class and you listen. You need to be there. And you can take that with you. And then you can launch everywhere. Everywhere, from a point of having a grounding and understanding of the historical precedents. And yes, this time is a time that you need to interpret. You know, people like me, we are finishing. I'm on the finale. It's your job now. And we're waiting for you. That make sense?
Yeah.
Any other questions? Yes.
When will the Martin Luther King project be done?
The Martin Luther King project is fraught with difficulties, more difficulties than I've ever seen a municipality go through in the making of a piece. So I don't want to say bad things about the city of San Diego, but the public art program is pretty difficult. They started out with an amount of money for this piece, and by the time it came to the artist, it was half. So somebody ate it. And then, in the process, they lost the support of Caltrans. They made it an impossible site. And we are doggedly and hopefully staying on it and continuing. But we probably will have to come to the community for a groundswell of support to get this done. It was supported very intently by the community. We vetted it through lots of people, and people came forward and really supported it. And now it seems to be stuck in a bureaucratic maze. So I'm waiting for the go, because I'm ready. You know, it's really at the bureaucratic level. I can't answer the question, and that's bad.
And this is more of a sculpture and garden piece than a mural piece?
It's steel. It's steel, Corten steel, 31 feet high. It's a giant work with a kind of cutout images of it, so that it is actually, it looks sort of like papel picado, like a cutout paper. It's very ephemeral in the sense that, but it's, at the same time, it's hugely powerful. And it's in a material that will change and rust and not have to be painted or maintained. So we are dealing with a lot of issues in terms of maintenance and funding. But there is support for it. There needs to be a groundswell, probably. And I'm waiting to see what the next step is. We've just given them the final budgets for it. We've given them all the materials they need. And the thing is back in the city of San Diego's court. So follow my site on sparkmurals.org or also on thejudybaca.com. And of course, I will blab my mouth off, because I do. If they're not doing the right thing, I'll be saying so. And incidentally, this happens all across the country. So, you know, there are some public art programs that are well maintained and well managed, and others that end up being bureaucratic nightmares.
I think it's kind of hilarious how much, like, I never got into art because of that whole stereotype or, like, starving artist idea of, like, how are you going to make a living afterward? but honestly, I don't see any profession that's not like that anyway. But I think it's funny.
Today, there isn't any profession.
Yeah, really.
You could join us. We're actually pretty good at it.
Right? That's what I'm saying. Throughout history, I don't think that I retain history any better in any other method than through art, which is kind of ironic for it being a profession that you can't make any money. Like, come on, you know? I have to thank you because you are teaching and establishing a method, a different curriculum to teaching and gathering and retaining that material, that history that does belong to us. And I think, and you obviously took the advantage of your Hispanic heritage, but I think all of us need to do that in all cultures. We do. And art, we
Well, I honestly think that the starving artist notion is a 19th century notion. You know, where somebody is in a garret cutting off their ears and, you know, waiting to be discovered and so forth. These are really old ideas. But it's remarkable how stereotypes about artists are one that we are, I mean, would you trust an artist with money? No, right? We're not responsible. We are not considered to be responsible people. Are we good citizens? No, we're gadflies. We throw rocks, but we don't actually participate. You know, look at all the stereotypes that we are dealing with about who an artist is. And in truth, that is not who an artist needs to be. There are many artists who, and particularly in countries all around the world that are not the US, in which artists are civic leaders, in which artists provide the inspiration for social change, in which they even become president of a country. We are not updating our image. We're not really making it clear that artists are people that can be doing the work of the soul and also be important citizens. And I invite you all to come on to the Spark mural site. And it's Spark, SPARCMURALS.org, and sign on to the letters that are going out to the Obama administration from a committee of my peers. Recently in a White House committee meeting, 60 artists who believe that we are important citizens of this country went to the White House, met with the Obama administration, and we came back with a resolve that what we needed to do was make clear a policy that would include artists in the stimulus package, that would put us to work again at plumbers' wages in the sense of the WPA 2. We're calling for another Works Progress Administration concept in which artists would work again to transform our communities, to do the good work. The kinds of works that I showed today were begun. The Great Wall, for example, could not be begun today. It was begun because of the Comprehensive Employment and Training Act, the CETA programs of the 1970s, which were programs that actually looked at employing artists and saw us as valuable citizens. And I think it's time for that again. And we are petitioning. We have a core number of people who've signed our statement. It's a very simple statement. It's going to the Obama administration. And the more people who sign it, as we put it forward, saying put artists to work again, understand that we are important members of a society, understand that culture is critical to the well-being of our country, and that we need to preserve cultural memory, and that we also need to preserve sites of public memory, and that we have important work to do as artists in our society. So I invite you to do that. Come on board, and let's send Obama a message so that he does the right things for the arts. Yeah.
Judy, if we don't bring back the arts into the education of our young people, we won't have artists who are able to participate and do what you're asking. And I
Exactly.
think it needs to begin at that level.
Well, we've had some very wrong-headed notions about No Child Left Behind, haven't we?
Yes, we have.
Okay. Yeah.
I
Yes.
feel one of the main reasons that artists are put down so much is generally because of the society, but not fear. We're afraid. People are afraid of the past. People are afraid of what they're doing right now. And if you notice, when we say we want to renew something, we want to bring something back and show people what we used to live in, because what we used to live in was yesterday, and we're still going through it today. People are so afraid to put money into something that might bring up a memory, that might evoke something that they don't want to find out about themselves. And the society as a whole, as an individual, people are scared and frightened of what someone might tell them, who they really are, and what they're really doing. Because we live in a society today where we're polluting our world, we're killing our world. And we're doing that now. As I speak, we are doing that. And no one wants to really open their eyes and say, this is what's going on. And when we want to look back and say, when we invented engines, when we invented trouble, when people started fighting, that's what used to happen. And what used to happen was just yesterday, and what was just yesterday is right now. And people are so afraid to fund something like that and look into the future. And what really needs to happen is, us as artists, we try our best, we really do. But people are afraid of us because we speak the truth. We show it in a creative manner that opens people's eyes. We don't sit there and say exactly, hey, you're killing our world. But instead what we might do is draw a withering tree showing that we're slowly losing our life. We don't sit there and say, you need to stop this now, but we give emphasis, we give small boundaries on what's really going on. And I think as a society as a whole, people need to step up and show we need to fund this, because as a young guy, I want people to know what I'm going through now, today, and I want them to know what my grandparents, my parents went through yesterday. And we need to step up and make that known. We need to let people know that if it dies, we'll have nothing. We'll only run ourselves right to the ground.
Mm-hmm. Well, divergent thinking, creative thinking is scary, isn't it? And you know, what does America make today? What are we making? I mean, I just came from Notre Dame, and I was seeing all the steel plants closed and all the car industry disappearing. And what we're looking at essentially is this, I mean, and especially as I'm trying to do mosaics and I'm making glass eagles, and I'm looking at, I have to go out of the country to find the craftsmen. So really, I think a great insurgence of the arts would be an important change of our economy, an important uplifting of our sense of being makers again and being creative people. Creative people are needed now more than ever. So I think it's really important that we make that noise about in that direction, that we have to be divergent thinkers, that we have to be creative people again. Well, I think we're done. Are we done, Alessandra? Is there any other questions? Thank you.